Hello and welcome to the Michael Mamas Show. I'm your host, Michael Mamas, and we're coming to you from Mount Soma, home of the Sri Someshwara Temple in the mountains of western North Carolina. Beautiful fall day today, sunny. Uh, a little, probably sweatshirt weather, I'd say. And it's only 10:30, so it's going to warm up even more. Just beautiful. At any rate, Scotty, you're with me today, and we're going to talk about about Darwin and the Veda, and this principle. If humanity would just get this principle, it's amazing, really, with all the technological advances, all the knowledge, and everything. What we're going to talk about today is so totally fundamental to the nature of life and how to live life and the nature of existence and how to work with your very existence and not just in a metaphysical sense, but in a very technological sense as well, and it's kind of mind-boggling that society at large really doesn't pay any attention to this, or if they do, it's really interesting because I almost don't want to say this because what would get projected onto it, but so give me some space here. But even what is said, for example, in the Bible or in the church, I mean, they allude to it and it's there, but it's so obscured and what I'm talking about here is just the modern understanding or the conventional understanding or the conventional perspective. But what's required then is just a deeper understanding of the knowledge that actually makes sense. And the way to make sense of it is to understand it, not just from an emotional perspective, though that's beautiful, that's fine, that cultures the heart, etc. The whole spiritual path of bhakti, devotion we talked about last time. But to also understand it from a perspective of pure physics, pure science, and when you integrate those two things, it's like integrating the left and right side of the brain, and it just makes sense of everything. And it's remarkable that in the Vedic literature, it's all there in tremendous detail. But see, even having said that, it still becomes elusive because it's the language of nature is not the language of people, it's the language of nature. And it's abstract by its very nature because look, this is all born out of profound abstraction. We're not talking arithmetic here, we're talking something very profound. And so by virtue of that, it's easily misunderstood. And there are just so many examples of that. The one I like to use is people walking around with their hands over their head thinking they're going to gain supernatural powers. I mean, it's such a misunderstanding of very profound knowledge, and so let's get to it. What is the fundamental structure that we're talking about? And it's very, very simple. And we've alluded to it many times, but so just briefly, the foundational information, the underlying basis of existence is one thing, and that's the unified field theory in modern physics. And as many modern physicists study it, they realize that one thing is pure consciousness, just consciousness. Like Swami Muktananda said, this is all just a play of consciousness. So consciousness, before this universe existed, what is it? It's just, what was here, the only thing that existed was consciousness. But what do we know about consciousness? Consciousness is conscious. But before anything else existed, what could it become conscious of? Itself. Consciousness becomes conscious of itself, and duality is born. Consciousness looks at the self over there, and it does like a double take, and that correlates to what in mathematics is called set theory. There's a difference between an apple sitting on a table and a set. Consciousness can kind of like putting the apple in a fence, and that defines it as something other. You have consciousness, and you have consciousness aware of itself, two separate things. I compare it to when you're brushing your teeth in front of the mirror and you catch your own reflection on the side of the mirror. It's like there are two people there. That's what it does to your consciousness. And it's interesting that we're talking about putting it in brackets, putting it in a fence. Well, now we've got the whole theory of Vastu, Veda, a whole aspect of Veda talking about space and the study of space and how it relates to Vastu science. Vastu means fence, And so at any rate, consciousness then becomes aware of those two things, puts that in the fence. You got a third thing. Consciousness becomes aware of those three things, put that in the fence. You got a fourth thing, and it cascades out into infinity with a very mathematically precise structure. And the geometric representations of that are called yantras. And yantra doesn't mean a fixed photograph. It means machine. Literally, that's the translation from the Sanskrit. So it's a mechanism of action. And that's the underlying basis of existence. So the point is then, everything is coming out of one thing. But what happens then is that the profundity of the whole thing, the complexity of the whole thing, the magnificence of the whole thing, the beauty of the whole thing is so overwhelming that we lose our identity, we lose our true sense of the totality, what this all really is, to our projections or perceptions that are limited. And then we start creating laws of conduct, laws of behavior, laws of nature based on that limited perspective. And we just therefore compromise our understanding. But now here's the thing. There's so many mappings. We talk about mappings. The ocean, you can say the ocean maps onto the field of pure unbounded consciousness. Pure isness equals consciousness. And then what happens is that, the water from the ocean of being evaporates. It goes into the relative. It manifests, if you will. And then it goes in the atmosphere, and then it rains on a mountaintop. And then the whole process of life is that water forming streams and going down, cascading down, eddy currents, blah, blah. And finally, waterfalls, and then it all lakes, ponds, whatever, and it ultimately makes its way back to the ocean of being. That's what happens. We are, in our essence, that ocean of being, consciousness, that unbounded field. That's what in the Christian, we're one with God, or the kingdom of heaven dwells within. That's what that means. But then we lose ourselves to relativity, and then we go through the cascades of life, waterfalls of life, eddy currents of life, until we finally wake up into our own true nature. Now, what's this all have to do with Darwin? Okay, Darwin, theory of evolution, says that how did species evolve? Where did human beings come from? What's evolution all about? Well, it said that there were molecules and things like that in the ocean. That's how it starts, he says, which is interesting, come to think of it. And a couple molecules come together and they're stable, and they exist. It's survival of the fittest. They're fit to exist in the environment, so they do. And then what happens is that over time, other molecules come together, more and more complex molecules get created, and these molecules then develop the ability to reproduce. And so they do, and they just perpetuate themselves. And then what happens with that is that over time, you get more and more complex structures, it goes to sponges and lizards and birds and that whole thing. And then it goes through the whole evolutionary chain until ultimately what we have is human beings. And that's just random chance that those molecules and things come together. And there's a lot of evidence for that if you think about it on one level. You see how all the different species correlate and how there's a natural unfoldment in the process, and it kind of, okay, that makes sense. But the problem with it, and this is very interesting, is that they did statistical studies with computers and that, and they came to the conclusion that something's not right because it's happening way too fast. So Darwin's theory is either wrong or he's missing something. And here's what it says. This is just Vedic knowledge, and it's just in the analogy we just gave of the ocean and the waterfall and then back to the ocean. Everything is gravitating back to the ocean. Now, why is that? What's that about? Well, there's this underlying basis of existence, which is the unified field, pure Chaitanya, and then and it's dynamic. It's a machine. It's a mechanism, as it interacts with itself, and that's quantum mechanics, the underlying basis of existence. And what happens then is that creates like waves or patterns or vibrations, if you will, of intelligence, and that those patterns of intelligence well up through all the different levels of manifest existence. And what that does then, it's like if you take a sandbox and just put some sand in there, let it sit there. You come back a month later, it's still just sand sitting in the sandbox. But if you put vibrations into it, then what starts to happen over time, this sand jiggles and stuff like that, and you start to see patterns, you've probably all seen this, emerging on the surface of the sand. And the longer you let that go, the more you do that, the more precise, the more detailed the patterns become. Well, like that, with this whole evolutionary process, the whole Darwinian process, the other component, the missing link, if you will, is that there's an underlying intelligence welling up through all levels of existence, and it's kind of enticing, inducing, seducing, compelling, pulling, pushing, however you want to say it, all of relativity, all of species to evolve, to take on that intelligence that's there at the underlying basis of existence. And that accelerates the process of, it's not just random chance. Everything is gravitating back to that underlying intelligence, which is the intelligence that created this entire universe. I mean, it's a huge amount of intelligence. And also, as we've said in the past, things have personified correlates to varying degrees. A human being, I mean, you hear me talking, you're not looking at a bunch of protons, electrons, neutrons, you're looking at a human being. And that's how you relate to me. So it's the personified correlate that gives it meaning. And that's true of our pets. It's true of animals, birds. Tangentially, I'm having a great time with the crows, feeding the crows. They're really smart. Anyway, personified correlates. And there's an inner knowing then that there's something precious in the depth of our being, that we protect our lives. Birds do that. Even an earthworm, retracts from too much heat and goes back into the soil, So there's a natural tendency to do that, to protect the divinity that's there and to evolve. Now, and what does evolve mean? Gravitate back more and more fully, embody that intelligence that underlies everything. And so that's the missing link that speeds up the whole Darwinian process of evolution. And it's all coming back to what? The image of God, the personified correlate to that underlying intelligence, And if we get onto that, if we start to understand that, if we start to function from that, it's far more than just spirituality. It's far more than just religion. It's unless you can define spirituality as the vessel that holds all knowledge, physics, everything. That's the foundation. But now, if you look at, for example, and this isn't a criticism, it's just a matter of fact, the way that, for example, it's talked about, or the people relate to it in the Bible. It's like, what, Scotty? Jesus is the truth, the light, and the way. I mean, Jesus knew that he was that one thing that was the source of everything. He was one with that. His consciousness evolved to the level that he was fully awake to that. But when people hear Jesus is the truth, if they don't really understand the science of it, even though the heart feeling of it is beautiful and valid, but if they don't understand the science of it, people start to have a hard time with even accepting it. It just doesn't make any sense, and all the different things. I mean, I love listening to these Christian preachers on the radio here in the mountains of Western North Carolina. These Baptist preachers, they're great. And everything they say, you can understand it on a much deeper level. It's not a criticism of them. These guys, a lot of them are very deep. I've talked to them, but it's just the level of expression that, most people are satisfied with. And that's fine. If that's, it's their choice. But the more the depth of understanding is there for people that want it, then the more it all starts to make sense, and you don't end up with this whole dynamic of all these people leaving the church. Now, I hope that all makes sense. Scotty, is that so far so good?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think I don't know if I'm saying this right or whatever, but it's almost like we, because the language that we use is what we understand, we mistake that for being able to explain everything.
Yeah.
And it doesn't work like that. I mean, it just doesn't. You can't do it. Right.
You see, because this is all good, Scotty. See, human beings, where does the process culminate? Where does it end? This evolutionary process. It culminates in a species that has the ability to be fully awake to its own true nature, to function in perfect harmony and integration with that transcendental level, that deepest level, quantum mechanical level, divinity, functioning from the divinity within your own being, whatever word you choose to use. But the thing is, there's a final step. The Christians allude to it as being born again. To me, being born again, even though it's a beautiful thing, to realize kind of awaken, it's an awakening, but that can't be confused really with the refinement of physiology and the culturing of the awareness so that it's actually a physiological reality and not a belief, an attitude, an emotional epiphany, whatever. You see, and so everything exists on different levels, On the surface level, God is, whatever, some notion. On a deeper level, on an astral level, if you will, God's some guy sitting on a cloud or what have you, and aren't even, and so there are different levels to understanding of enlightenment, being born again, whatever you want to say, an awakening, and so just because the species has evolved to a point where individuals are capable of being fully awake doesn't mean that they necessarily are, but it becomes a very powerful cosmic computer, if you will, human awareness. But now, what I like to say is that, if you're going to run off the road, you're better off in a little red toy wagon than in a Porsche, right? And what we have now is this incredible computer of human awareness that's functioning from a limited point of view, because as we developed as a species and developed our understandings of life, and all that is great, but it's limited, and we become so identified then with those notions that we white knuckle onto those, and it actually interferes with deeper understandings and deeper awakenings. What do we call that? Paradigm, identity, what have you. And really think about it now, that is the state of human awareness. That is like the global consciousness of human awareness. It's all narrative identity. People look for a narrative that's going to be truth, and it's all, again, existing on different levels, echoes of truth, and echoes of truth perceived as truth hold truth at bay. And that's a lot of the confusion around so many things. Different religions can be like that. Even scientific endeavors, it's a great paradigm, Newtonian physics or quantum mechanics or what have you. But They're all based on certain paradigm identity. And what we're talking about, and when we talk about being enlightened, what we're talking about is functioning from a place where you're functioning through these different paradigms for no other reason than it's habit, just in your life. But nevertheless, you're awake to and integrated with a level that is deeper than that, that is even transcendental. And that's what they mean by enlightenment, you know. But Swami Muktananda said an interesting thing. He said, if you don't like your personality, you better change it now. He said, because if you don't like it, because after you're enlightened, you won't care. So you see, we're so caught up in the surface level of, are we behaving spiritually? And are we ending each sentence with an upbeat? And, you know, like that, because that somehow people oftentimes associate certain behavioral patterns like that with being more spiritual. Where really spirituality is something much deeper. Now, there are laws and rules of code and conduct, and they're kind of like guideposts along the way. And so they're good, but they're not, just because you're obeying all those rules doesn't mean you're an enlightened being, you see. So now there's so much more to say. Think about it. All the different species, be they plant or animal, are all gravitating back to that one thing, that unified field. But see, different species, different, be they plant or animal, there are different values. That self-interacting dynamic, it's like an orchestra of so many values, so many qualities. And some plants evolve and are more fully evolved, if you will, along one channel or one aspect, others along another aspect. Same with animals, you see. And of course, the human physiology is evolving. And since it's so evolved, it tends to be more lively on more different aspects. But certainly, like, you know, dogs can hear sounds that humans can't, for example, you know. So here's how this, and what we're getting to now here is this whole principle of, well, one thing is herbology. Let's say there's a particular value, a particular quality that wells up out of that wholeness value of the unified field, and health means wholeness. And so let's say it's deficient in a person's physiology. Well, if you have knowledge of herbs, you can find the plant that is lively with that value, and ingesting it then enlivens that value in the physiology. That's the whole idea of herbology. But generally, just as we said, the unified field is an orchestra of all these different values. So the real art of herbology is knowing what herbs to bring together to create a what's the word, Scotty? A compound that plays the whole symphony of that particular aspect that needs to get enlightened in your physiology. It's usually not just one herb. It can be, but it's usually not. Now, there's another thing to talk about there, and that is this whole idea of, in Western medicine, of isolating the active ingredient in a particular plant and then just injecting that into the person. Well, that can save lives and things. So but at the same time, it can happen at a cost, because a lot of times what's happening is you're compromising that orchestra and just pulling out one value, whereas the whole orchestra enlivens it and integrates it more fully with the physiology. There are a lot of examples to that. I think the most popular one is digitalis. It helps the heart beat better, basically. And if when it's isolated as digitalis, you got to be very careful with it. You can kill the person if you overdose. But the herb itself, it's kind of got a fail-safe in it, because if you eat too much of that, it makes you vomit, so you don't die, you know. So anyway, there are a lot of different examples. That's just one. And so there's the whole idea of herbs and things. And similarly, different animals have different values. But where do these values come from? Again, they come from the transcendental depth. And within the transcendental depth is the seed form of all these different qualities, the infinite number of different qualities. They're all coming from the one God, but they all have different, faces, if you will, and they have different values. And those different values can be found manifest in different ways at different levels of existence. So, for example, an elephant. An elephant, has the ears and like that. And and also there's the sagittal section of the brain, cross section of the brain, and also a leaf. And if you look at them, they have very similar silhouettes. And why is that? Is it coincidence? No, it's not coincidence. It's a value. It's a quality within the unified field that wells up through different levels of existence in different ways. And, a lot of people look at the whole Vedic tradition and they, oh, this is kind of weird. You got this one face of God that has an elephant head and another one has a monkey head and all this, and it's just too weird. Well, no, what that is it's expressions of these values that are contained eternally, really, within the self-interacting dynamic of pure consciousness, isness, oneness, in seed form. And as it manifests out, it can birth elephants, it can birth it's an influence that goes into this cross section of the brain, the structure of the brain. And so that's what that's about, And everybody, even in the Vedic tradition, it's clear there's one God, there's one unified field. That's it. Christ knew he was that. He knew he was the truthful light in a way there was no other. Absolutely right. But there are different aspects. There are different values. God is not so simple, so simplistic. In the one sense, it's very simple. Unified field, God is it. God is everything. And you'll even see it on Christian commercials, even that, oh, this world is so messed up. The only way out is we all have to turn to God. Well, it turns out that's right. We all have to awaken to that level within the depth of our being that is one with everything, the source of infinite intelligence, harmony, and function from that place. But we're trying to function from a limited place of narratives that we developed in trying to impose that narrative on existence, but it's too limited, you see? And so we compromise life. And everybody, okay, this narrative's not working. Now let's try this narrative and see if it works. You see it in politics, don't you? Capitalism, socialism, communism, round and around in circles we go. And what's really needed is wisdom. And where does wisdom come from? It comes from awakening to that depth of our own being. People can call it the soul, if you will, How's that, Scotty? Is that clear?
Yeah.
Oh, let's talk about DNA a little bit. What's the DNA? The DNA maps, right? We're doing mapping. The big toe maps onto the foot, right? Or the foot maps onto the whole body. The big toe maps onto the brain. The heel maps onto the pelvis. Cuts the field of reflexology. And they do it with everything. The ear, it's another mapping onto the rest of the body. The hand, on and on. And so DNA maps onto, it's the seed form. You could say it maps onto that quantum mechanical level, that bhavati-tam level, that level of wholeness, of oneness, that is the seed form out of which everything emerges. And like that, the DNA is the seed form for the human physiology. And that's why, and that's in that seed form, that's the Veda. The Veda isn't a bunch of books. It's not a philosophy. It's not a religion. It's nature. People will take it and try to turn it into a religion or philosophy, and they can't help to do that. And I'm not arguing, but nevertheless, we have to understand that what we're really talking about there is the nature of existence. Veda is really that level that correlates to that bhavati-tam, the deepest level. The Bhavati-tam kind of means, well, Chaitanya is pure consciousness, pure isness. Bhavati-tam is just that deepest level when it first starts to emerge into relativity, and there's this self-interacting dynamic. But you see, oh boy, it gets a little. I mean, I could go on for this. That's so much to it all. But I guess I will say that there's a level of existence, and it's actually different groups that will actually debate, is it relative or is it absolute? That's another lecture. I can get into it, but anyway, there is a level, let's just say it that way, where that self-interacting dynamic is going on. but it's going on in a way where identity of the observer is not lost to the perception. Just like consciousness views itself as other and thinks there's duality, really there's just one. And that's called the pragya parat, the mistake of the intellect. You know, so the wholeness value is lost. You see.
Michael, is it good for us to kind of understand, I guess, that we're coming from a conditioned awareness versus the expanded awareness? Is it better to err on the side of, okay, I'm operating from that conditioned awareness because it's such a, because it's easy to mistake, okay, I'm there, I really got it, maybe you can talk about that.
Yeah, we call that the I get it syndrome, don't we, Scotty?
Yeah.
Okay, you get this. Oh, wow, I get it. I got it. Okay, great.
Yeah.
Now I'm enlightened, and that's not it. That's taking a state of physiology and taking an astral echo of that, an echo of that truth, and creating a narrative around it, and then deciding that we're spiritual and we're enlightened, and it just makes a mess of everything. So that's why we say humility is the flip side of wisdom,
Yeah.
Is that responsive, Scotty? What else do you want to say about it?
Yeah, it's just, like, because there's so much of people that are in that space of, no, I know. I mean, I got, that, I don't know. I mean, it's just, I don't know if we can expand on that or just how important it is to just
It becomes a source of fanaticism. Some people become so adamant about their fanatical perspective that they it almost breeds hate and contempt for anything other than that.
Yeah.
It's almost, sometimes I feel like, this is all just a bad grade B sci-fi movie, where there's this knowledge here, and it's a profound knowledge, and it's a deep knowledge, but it just got kind of twisted into echoes of truth, and people are reaching out to these echoes, and it's leading them astray, and isn't it easy to hear that and say, oh, well, no, this is just another religion, and oh, everybody else is astray, and no.
I see how other people do that. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. It's there's the humility component. The idea is to evolve the physiology, evolve the awareness, and evolution is a process that takes time. I mean, the most powerful tool for an individual is proper meditation. And I know people, oh, well, I've been meditating 10 years, so I get it now. And this stuff isn't measured in years or decades. It's measured in lifetimes, really. It's an evolutionary process, evolution. But at the same time, there are awakenings. So we could say awakenings come about gradually, all of a sudden. It's an aha, oh yeah, an epiphany, But there's, what is it? There's a whole complex of temples. Jageshwara, it's called, in the Himalayas. I went there; it's pretty cool. But and it's just, there's a temple for each of the main categories of awakenings, 108 of them, And so these are different awakenings, and all too often somebody has an awakening. Okay, they think that's the big kahuna. They think they're enlightened. It's not like that. Multiple awakenings, and humility is the flip side of awareness, and that's why it's not a good thing even to put a label. Oh, this guy's enlightened and this guy's not enlightened, because it's not an FDA stamp. It's not a seal of approval. We just live our lives and we do our best to evolve, and there's humility to the whole thing,
and it doesn't matter whether you think that guy is enlightened or not. It's, what are you doing?
Yeah. And somebody once asked the great saint about, who he is, what he is, like that. And he says, you know me by my teachings. go with the knowledge, go with the teachings. Don't try to put somebody on a pedestal. If somebody is great and giving great teachings and great knowledge, we respect that. And, we even would, at least, I don't know what's going on in the world today, but when I was a kid, our teachers, my professors, I had some professors. I had a great math prof and so many great physics profs and everything, and as my double major math and physics. But and I respected them. I held them high because of their teachings, and the problem becomes in the spiritual arena, if we all have our narratives, we have our preconceived notions that we've been indoctrinated into from childhood. And what we oftentimes demand of our spiritual teachers is that they conform to our preconceived notions. And it's actually our preconceived notions that we oftentimes need to evolve past, because we're white knuckling onto something that's not consistent with nature, But doggone it, as soon as, and especially if somebody's teachings are great, look at Christ, these great teachings, but all of a sudden he wasn't conforming to what the Romans wanted or what have you. And they actually crucified him. That's why there's a tradition. It's a tradition to crucify our spiritual teachers, because sooner or later something comes up. If it's true or not, it gets projected onto them, and then all of a sudden they're not a great spiritual teacher. So how can we crucify them? And that just shows that's the nature of the state of the human awareness at this time. We become so identified with our narrative, our preconceived notions about how things are, that we can't move past it. And believe me, if you ever do come across anybody who's enlightened, they're not going to be dancing to your tune. They're not going to be interested in conforming to your preconceived notion based on what you've learned or been taught or indoctrinated into. In fact, their interest would be in helping you move past that. But so you see, at some point, oh yeah, we want a great enlightened teacher and stuff. But at some point, if you're around them too much, all of a sudden they're not dancing to your tune. You reject them. Oh, I thought he was enlightened. He's not enlightened. That kind of a thing. You could do some great grade B sci-fi movies on this, couldn't you? What else, Scotty?
I think we've covered it all.
Here's the other thing. These Vedic cognitions, I mean, granted, it's a language of abstraction. If we take them too superficially, and we can turn them into a narrative, and then the real knowledge that's there gets compromised. I mean, admittedly, but nevertheless, it's there. Those cognitions are there. They've been passed on verbally, and then finally started to get written down or recorded and things like that. And they're there. And what are they? They're the deepest level of understanding, that deepest level of knowledge, albeit abstract in its very nature. It's there. But society's turned a blind eye to it. It's remarkable, really. So what do we do? Okay, we can encourage people to meditate. I don't want to meditate. It's too much. I'm busy, whatever, But what we're doing here at Mount Soma, there is a technology, and it's right out of the Vedic literature. It's abstract, but it's accessible. And we have scholars, Vastu scholars like that, many scholars, the pundits like that. And we now have the knowledge of a technology of how to build something that radiates that quantum mechanical level, that Bhavatitam level, that deepest level of coherence and intelligence and wisdom, and radiates that value out, so it permeates and lifts all society and all people, all animals, plants, everything. Just evolves the planet, brings out what's called the Lakshmi Value, that value of abundance. And we're in the process of building it. That is what Mount Soma is all about, and that's what, I mean, to me, what else is there? If you have that knowledge, if you come upon it, that's what I dedicate my life to. You know, there's if we can build that, radiate out that value according to the Shastras, according to the Vedic literature and the writings of Mamuni Mayan, you know, Vishwakarma's assistant, if you will, or associate, that would be enough to transform the world, you know. So why not? Why not? You know, we have to build one for each continent, but they say one for each continent is sufficient. So we're building one for the United States. And to me, that's the one that makes sense to start, because let's face it, the United States is, you know, the most powerful nation in the world right now. And if we can transform that, the rest will just happen automatically, you know. All right. So unless there's something more, Scotty, I think that's enough for this time.
Yeah.
All right. Good. Thanks everybody for listening. And we'll talk to you again next time on Ancient Secrets Revealed.